everybody, this is Eden Maybon of lightcycleastrology.com. Welcome back to the channel and Happy New Year. This is the first Monday in 2023. So brand new year, we've got some big astrology coming this year. And this is the second installment in a series that I'm doing this week, which is titled The 5 Biggest Astrology Transits for 2023. And I'm covering those 5 transits over the next week or so. The first one we did yesterday, which was the Saturn ingressing into the sign of Pisces, part 1. Today is part 2, so we're going into my second of the 5 biggest transits. And even though this one isn't strictly a transit, it is something really special to this year within the context of the year's astrology. And that is going to be that we have a double new moon that takes place in the sign of Aries. The first one of those is on March 21st, and the second one takes place on April 19th. So essentially what happens is we get a new moon right at the very, very beginning of the sign of Aries. And then we get another one as that whole lunation cycle plays out and goes through the full moon and comes back to another new moon. That new moon actually lands at the very end degrees of Aries. Now, this is something that happens from time to time. It usually takes around 15 lunation cycles for something like this to occur. And generally what happens is we will double up on either 2 new moons in a sign, or we will double up on 2 full moons in a sign. So why is this important? Well, just aside from it being kind of an interesting thing to have 2 new moons in one sign or 2 full moons in one sign, the interesting thing about this for me is that it really changes the sequence within the lunation cycle itself, and it does so over the course of 15 lunation cycles to come. So, for instance, over the course of 2022, we had what I would call a regular or natural sequence of lunation cycles, which means we would get a new moon, and let's say that new moon happens in the sign of Aries. Well, as the moon waxes and makes its way towards the full moon moment, which is the metaphorical or symbolic culmination of that cycle, it would happen naturally in its opposite sign of Libra, right? As you guys, I'm sure, already know. And as that cycle begins to wane, as the moon begins to wane and head towards a natural decline, it makes its way back to the new moon. And as it does so, at some point, the sun will actually ingress into the next sign. And then there will be a new moon in the next sign, and then the cycle repeats. So what is happening is the sun ingresses within a new sign, but it happens during the waning part of the lunation cycle itself. So why is this important? Well, because the waning half of the lunation cycle represents this natural tendency to begin to share in the fruits of the current lunation cycle, to share the fruit, to reap the bounty, to learn from the experience of the culmination of the cycle itself, and then to gradually move towards the future, move towards something that will become new when we get the new moon. And that is sort of it's the natural progression where, you know, we all do certain things at certain times, but those things end up getting played out, and then we naturally want to move on to the next level. It's sort of like leveling up maybe in a game or something like that, you know, or something like you go to college in your early 20s, but the natural progression of leveling up, at some point you're going to leave college. That is going to be coming to a decline or waning moment, and then you're going to enter maybe a career, and then that will have to, you know, wax and build and build and build, and then come to a culmination, and then at some point you're going to retire, and then that will start to wane down. And so as things naturally wax and wane, it's natural to look ahead towards the future. Okay, so when we get the sun changing signs during the declining or waning portion of that cycle, it feels natural because the sun is the symbol of what stirs our hearts and motivates us within the astrology chart. The sun can represent the blooming of motivation that you have. So for instance, if one day you feel like you really need to, have some kids, maybe it's time to start that family. Well, that could be during a lunation cycle that's taking place or got started in the sign of Cancer, right? The sun being, for instance, in the sign of Cancer might stir that inborn fate or destiny that is built within your soul. And that seed might sprout and say, hey, I really feel motivated to do something Cancerian. Maybe I need to go home and see my dad. Maybe I need to go home. Maybe I need to give my mom a call. It's been a while. Maybe it's time to have children. So those are the natural tendencies that we can have with the sun traveling through the zodiac in different signs. It's going to speak to different things, and that really is dependent on the domicile ruler of that particular sign. So, for instance, if the sun is in Cancer, the domicile ruler, the natural lord of Cancer, is going to be the moon. What you are combining is the motivation of spirit, or the awakening of spirit or ideal, and it is being filtered or looked through the lens of the moon. Well, the moon wants to do lunar things, so you could characterize that particular awakening of spirit as it is seen through what the moon likes to do. For instance, family or mother or something like that. So I think you get the idea, but suffice it to say that why this is important, this double new moon in the sign of Aries, it transitions the changeover of spirit from the waning part of the lunation cycle to the waxing part of the lunation cycle. So I know this is technical. I'm going to pull up the real-time clock and just give you a demonstration of this so that you can get a visual, because a lot of times visuals are just easier to understand, especially if you're having trouble following what I'm saying just by me explaining it here. Okay, so let me get the annotation going. And so what we're going to do, so I got the clock set to March 20th, 2023, and this is just before the first new moon that takes place this year in the sign of Aries. Now, again, we normally only get one, but you can see that we're just, the moon is at 15 degrees. The sun is right at that last degree of Pisces. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this circle, but I'm going to go forward now by days. And I'm just going to move the clock forward, and you'll see the moon pass very quickly. It just takes one day. By March 21st, we get that new moon that takes place in the sign of Aries. Now, this is the first one. And okay, so watch this. So I'm just going to circle this just so if your screen is small, you can see this. But anyway, there is the new moon. Now look at the degrees. It's at 0, 0. Both the moon and the sun go through this moment where they're both at 0, 0 degrees. And so that means that they're conjunct in the sky. They're together in the sky. That is the new moon moment, when a new birth or new seed is symbolically happening between the planet of the moon, which represents fortune, fate, karma, and the planet of the sun, which represents spirit. So again, that is where the natural tendency for a potential new seed of motivation begins to emerge within your heart or your soul. And what we want to look for is, well, what is that speaking to? It is definitely speaking to Mars, who is the dispositor of the sign of Aries. So what kind of new motivation might you experience on a new moon in Aries? Well, it has something to do with Mars-like archetypal qualities. Mars is a planet that likes to bring about brand new things that you're doing, like completely new projects, something you've never done before, or it just likes to begin things afresh because it is a planet that is the ruler of a spring sign. Mars is going to be the symbol that that new seed filters through, that new motivation that is welling up, that you come into life born with, right? It's a natural moment where something inside of you, something inside of your soul is going to be saying, hey, I feel like I want to do this, and maybe I always knew I would, and now's the time. So that is the sense that you get from a new moon in the particular sign of Aries. But what happens now is, watch this. Let's get rid of these circles. So what am I talking about when the transition happens during the waxing portion of the lunation cycle versus the waning portion of the lunation cycle? And just like I was saying before, over the last 15 months, this last year, 2022, we had what I would call a natural sequence where the changeover of spirit from the sun ingressing into the next sign actually happens during the waning part of the lunation cycle. Okay, but this year, after this Aries period, we are going to be, for the next 15 lunation cycles, we are actually going to be front loaded on the changeover of spirit. The sun will ingress into the sign after it during the waxing portion of the lunation cycle. That is quite different in character. Let's go ahead. I want to just demonstrate this. March 21st now. We've got the first new moon in Aries. Watch this. I'm just going to go forward by days. The moon will start to wax, right? It's getting more light. Okay, roughly. Okay, now we've got the moon in Cancer. So this is roughly the first quarter moon. The light is increasing on the face of the moon. The moon represents fortune. So as we begin something new at the time of the new moon, as that motivation becomes awakened and stirred, we begin to take action on that motivation. Generally, the first quarter moon is where you take that action. The moon is the planet that symbolizes how the ebb and flow of material fortune, or fate, as it were, plays out. It's the circumstances that you go through as you try to shine. So we're at the first quarter moon now. Watch, we're still in that waxing phase of the new lunation cycle. And so watch this. So this is what happens naturally in regular sequence. We have the full moon come through by about April the 5th, between April the 5th and the 6th, right? So there's the moon opposite to the sun. And we're getting to the culminative moment of that cycle of action. The new moon begins the cycle, and then as it culminates to the full moon, that culmination of the full moon represents the fruiting of whatever it is that happened during the building phase or the waxing phase of the cycle. So this could be a time where, let's say you start a new exercise program. This could be a time where you are past maybe those first few days of exercising and your muscles were sore at first. And now this could be a time, even though it's only 2 weeks later, maybe your muscles are just now starting to get where you can do your workout and you're not getting as sore the next day. So it's kind of like there's a culmination of that beginning seed that was stirred. So it's like the new moon comes in Aries and you're like, it's the new year. I really need to get healthy. I'm going to start some new healthy activity for myself. Well, this could be the moment that you sort of get over the initial hurdle of initiating that plan, and now you're reaping the benefits. Now, as the moon goes past the culmination moment, which happens in the opposite sign as where it began, it will enter into the waning phase. The light on the moon will now begin to diminish. And as it does so, this might be where you begin to think about, okay, if we're sticking to the exercise analogy, let's say, you begin to think, well, okay, I'm not sore anymore. Maybe I need to add in a new part of this health regimen. And it's right around the last quarter moon right here, which is taking place on April 13th. We still got the sun in Aries. It's right around that last quarter moon that we begin to maybe look ahead toward the future. We begin to separate from the initial motivation. We're preparing for a new cycle of motivation to sort of add to it or level us up. Now, as we go forward a couple more days, see, now we're closing in on the last part of the cycle here. Now, what happens? Watch this. This is the interesting thing. Now, normally what happens, what we have experienced over the last 15 lunation cycles over the course of 2022, what normally happens is you can see that the sun is very, very close to changing signs. And so we usually get this dark moon or dying moon, the waning balsamic moon, as it's known. And this is usually a time where you're really tying up all of those loose ends to the previous lunation cycle's motivation. Like it's really on its last leg, and you're very much prepared now to pass the torch on to the next part of what you are feeling called to do. This is a moment where you can see the sun is about to ingress into a new sign. That represents spirit transitioning or relocating into another temple. Now, as spirit does that, spirit naturally takes on a new domicile host. So, for instance, right now, spirit, this whole lunation cycle has been looked after by Mars, the host of Aries. That has happened over the course of the whole lunation cycle. Usually in regular sequence, this is the moment where the sun will move into the next sign. And this is natural because it feels like we're letting go of the old cycle, and we're preparing for the seed that happens within the next motivational impulse that we're going to be soon to experience as the sun crosses over that threshold into the new sign. As it does so, we're going to get a new dispositor. So when the sun moves into Taurus, for instance, after April 18th, it is now going to be Venus. So this is the natural sequence. I just want you guys to get a feel for this is the natural way that the sequence tends to feel better or natural or more in line. It's like we're going with the natural flow of birth, life, experience, culmination, and then decline and old age. All of these normal timings are just happening kind of in the same flow. When that changes is right after this for us this year. So, okay. Now, what doesn't happen this year is that as I move the clock forward one more day, watch this. We don't get that transition of spirit into Taurus during the balsamic waning moon. Now, watch this. I have to go forward by hours now so I don't blow past the sun here, but watch the moon get closer and closer to that 29th degree. There it is. Okay, so yeah, right about there. You can see that there is, you know what? Let's, just because I have a Virgo 11th house, let's get this thing dead, exact moment of the new moon where the moon and the sun come together here. So there it is. We are at, okay. Right there is the exact new moon. We got 29 and 50 minutes. So we're at the second new moon in the same sign of Aries that we had the last one, which is on April 19th, about 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that's about 10, 11, probably for East Coast or Central time. So there's the second new moon that is happening. So what does this signify? Well, this signifies that the motivation that you had for the previous lunation cycle that you've already gone through, the soul begins a new cycle of motivation, but it does so using the same dispositor that it did the cycle before. And that is what changes. That's what's new in 2023. Over the course of the new year, this is what happens now. So again, we're back to Mars. Now, it doesn't stay that way. What happens now is the changeover of spirit. Watch this. This is the cool part. The changeover of spirit now takes place when the new lunation cycle begins, and it's during the waxing part of the cycle. It's during the building, where we're working towards a culmination. We have the initial spark of motivation. We have the initial idea. The seed has sprouted. And now is the moment where, over the next course of the 14 days or so, that is going to, we're going to manifest that some way or another out there in the world or inside us. But one way or another, that seed is going to grow into something that fruits and culminates. Having the changeover of the sun into the next sign, something I'm calling the changeover of spirit, or the transition of spirit, or the relocation of the sun, during the first part of the cycle, is the difference that we have this year. So there you go. We just go one more day ahead, and now the sun moves into Taurus after that new seed is sprouted. So imagine this. You've had a new seed sprout again in a Mars ruled sign. So it's another initiating sort of initial springtime kind of motivation or seed. And then as that seed begins to just barely sprout, I mean, it's probably just still in the cracking the shell moment, the transition of spirit happens. Why does this even matter? It seems like, well, why does Eden, why does this even matter, right? Well, okay, here's why I think it matters, is because look at the culmination now. As the cycle culminates, as we come to the full moon moment, we don't have a full moon in the natural opposite to where the new moon began. The new moon began at the very end of Aries, but we don't have a full moon in the opposite sign. Now, let me get rid of this. Now we have the full moon taking place in the opposite sign to where the sun transitioned. Okay. So there you go. Full moon now happening in Scorpio. So that, to me, is an indicator that the motivation, the seed that is started in one sign, has to make a transition. It's sort of like saying this. It's like saying, okay, let's take Aries and Taurus. It's like saying, okay, I'm feeling a new desire or motivation to get healthy and exercise. I'm going to start a new exercise routine, or maybe I'm going to learn a new sport, or, maybe I'm going to take up race car driving all of a sudden, or whatever it is. So something Aries, right? But as that idea just barely gets going, there's a change of motivation. And now all of the sudden, it's like the motivation switches gears, and now the motivation is ruled something by Venus. So it started out where the motivation was characterized by Mars, having started in a Mars-ruled sign, but then it goes through a transition of spirit, or a transition of motivation, where it's now being sort of filtered through the characteristic of Venus, because now the sun is in Venus's sign as that lunation cycle is trying to grow and develop into something. So now we're talking, that's a big difference, right? You're starting out doing something for yourself, very independent, very Mars-like. Maybe you're exercising, or, doing something on your own. Now, all of a sudden, you're doing something with Venus. You're in a relationship, or you're exercising with your partner. So that is the basic idea right there. The basic idea is that when it's front-loaded, when the beginning part of the cycle experiences that transition of spirit, when the sun changes signs in the beginning of the lunation cycle, when the cycle is getting going and it's building, it's developing towards the culmination, from the new moon to the full moon. When the changeover happens during that part, or that half of the cycle, that's where you can see symbolically that there is a change of motivation. So there are many, many implications to this symbolism. For instance, when the sun changes, does let's go back a few days. When the sun changes, representing a potential change of motivation, so the new moon starts out in Aries. The sun is exalted in Aries. The sun has incredibly good dignity. It is said to be victorious and exalted, lifted up. Solar things are incredibly potent and powerful. It's as if the king has all of the resources he needs. He has the wealth, he has the energy, he has the power. So that new seed is going to have all of that vitality to it. But as we go forward and the transition of the sun happens into the sign of Taurus, the transition of spirit happens, the sun experiences a downgrade in dignity. Something we look at in ancient astrology is the dignities of planets moving through the different signs. So that is speaking to the fact that you started your exercise routine, you've got all this power and motivation, you're ready to go, you're doing it on your own, you don't need anything, you're powering your own sails. Now there is a change in spirit where it's like, oh, no, I'm going to do this with my partner. And there's a little bit of a drop in dignity, meaning you don't have your own autonomy anymore to just go out there and do it. You're relying on Venus now, and Venus says, no, you got to do it socially. You need to join a group. You need to do it with your partner. You're waiting for them to get ready. They're tying their shoes. You just want to go run. It's a very different thing. So you can see how that transition of spirit changes the outcome of the development of that particular lunation cycle. And we have 12 of those a year. So these 12 lunation cycles are, they are what get us through the year. And there's a natural, return to those 12 different lunation cycles each year, right? We're just coming back to them. And those 12 archetypes are, by and large, what covers all of the experience that we have as a spirit soul making our way through material reality. That's just how life plays out within all of these different realms. And as we see that front loaded now on the beginning of the cycle, that is different. So let me just give you a few brief examples. I don't want to belabor this too much, but let me just give you a few brief examples here. What I want to do is just go forward a couple of months to give you a sense. Let me just look at my notes real quick. I want to give you a sense of something a little bit more drastic, why this matters when we get down the road. Oh, okay. Actually, I forgot to mention. So actually, instead of me going forward by months, let me keep going on this for a second. So what happens now? Let me explain how this whole thing happens in the first place. Well, so what happens is when you get lunations, new moons or full moons that are very, very close to either the end or the beginning of a sign, that is when you are about to see a changeover within the sequence, meaning you will either switch from having that transition of spirit, that the sun ingressing into a new sign during the waxing part of the cycle, or you will have that changeover occur during the waning part of the cycle. That is a thing that sort of alternates back and forth, and it takes about 15 months of one one side of the coin to play out, and then it takes 15 months for the other side of the coin to play out. And my argument is that having the changeover in the waning part of the cycle is the more natural, smooth. It just feels right, I think, to have it happen more in the waning. It's more in line with sort of the natural ebb and flow of development and decline, I would say. But if we keep going, another example, we got October 14th, 2023. We're having the new moon take place right around the 21st degree of Libra. If you recall, when this thing started happening in Aries, we had the new moon right at the very, very beginning degrees of the sign of Aries. Now so what happens is each lunation cycle will progress the sun a little bit deeper into the sign at the time that the new moon comes back around. So it slowly works over 15 lunation cycles. The sun starts at the beginning of the sign and it's slowly moving ahead, or each new cycle, it is moving ahead a little bit by degree by degree. And eventually we get to about 15 lunation cycles into the progression of that. And you start to see it now getting very, very close to the end of that sign when the new moon takes place. So you can see even by October, we've already moved from the beginning degrees of the zodiac sign to like the, 2/3 into the zodiac sign, right? The last 10 degrees of that sign we're already in. So that's when the new moon occurs. Now watch what happens here. This is really, really cool. If I go forward now from the new moon moment here on October 14th, watch this. The new moon begins that developing cycle. It's building. The new motivation is going. We've gotten to the first quarter moon by October 21st or so. And so we're now in that developing part where it's Libra season. Let's say that you're trying to reinvigorate your relationship or something. Now, we've had the idea on October 14th, and now we're going on a date night. We're really trying to put some action into this thing. Just using a simple example. But okay, there it was right there. But now as spirit transitions, there we go. Look at that. Between the 22nd and the 23rd, spirit transitions from, let me get the circle going. Spirit transitions from Libra into Scorpio over the next day. So what happens is that motivation changes from having a dispositor of Venus when the sun is still in Libra. That new seed is developing in line with Venusian things. That new motivation is speaking and began with Venusian things. But by the time we're trying to put that plan into action and do something about it right around the first quarter moon. Look at that. The motivation changes, something changes, and there's a transition of spirit. And now we have a new dispositor. Now the sun has a new dispositor. So the motivation changes from kind of a Venusian cycle into a Martian cycle. That's quite different again. We also look at the aspect that happens. We're talking about roughly a square aspect that is playing out between the sun and the moon. So not only have we moved into the motivation has shifted or transitioned, the spirit, the motivation has sort of transmuted from a Venusian archetype into a Martian archetype, but we are also, seeing the relationship between the sun and the moon be in a square formation that is of the nature of Mars. So what could this be? Going back to our example, let's say that it's Libra season. You feel like you really need to spend more time with your relationship. Maybe you've been working too hard and the relationship has suffered. It's like you get to this point where you feel this emerging impulse within your soul, the stirring of an image that says, the most important thing really is the people in my life and my relationship. So let me put some work into that. And by about the time that you start trying to act on that and start trying to steer your life towards, that new direction, trying to implement some of those new impulses or those new motivations, right around that time, there is a changeover of spirit that is described from going from something Venusian into something Mars. So it's as if you encounter something along the way that says, oh, wait a minute, I tried to do this Venus type of thing, but maybe I should rethink that. Maybe I should make a course correction, and maybe I need to do something Mars-like altogether. So for instance, maybe it's like, oh, it's sex. That's what I need for my relationship. Or maybe it's something I got burned. Maybe you try to begin dating people again, and and you got somebody didn't show up, and they ghosted you, and you're like, F that. I'm I'm just gonna be on my own again. That's how you could sort of see it show up or manifest. So okay, now that I've given you examples and shown you how this can play out, it is a very nuanced thing to look at within the year, but it does play an overall role within the year because, again, in 2022, we were in a different sequence of lunation. We were in the sequence where we would get that initial burst of motivation. We would play that out to some type of fruiting or culmination or conclusion, and then we would naturally begin to let go and release that and move towards the next new thing where we are going to level up or have a new form of inspiration come into our soul or into our being at that time. We were sort of in that regular sequence. This year is almost like, I don't want to say like a retrograde, but it's almost like that alternation of sequence where now the cycle begins and then there's a changeover of spirit in the beginning as we're trying to develop or grow the initial spark of inspiration. You see that changeover, and you see that for the next 15 lunation cycles. So that is something that, although a little bit nuanced, it is something that will make a difference. Generally, here are the guidelines for how this can affect the year. Number one, depending on the dignity that happens during the changeover, that will give you some clues. So for instance, the sun going from Aries to Taurus, the sun is exalted and lifted up. He has great dignity, which means that that idea is going to have a lot of vitality to it. As the sun transitions during the first part of the cycle where things are developing, the dignity is downgraded. So you get a sense that there's a loss or a weakening of your efforts. Or maybe, if it's a change of dignity that is for the worse, it's like you try to do something and the cycle gets stunted somehow. Maybe it's your efforts are somehow weaker. There is a sense of having your inspiration being uprooted and potentially having to try to relocate that into another call to action. So if it's a downgrade in dignity, that matters because it's like arrested developments for the next 15 months, depending on how that changeover occurs with the sun going into a new sign during the developing part. Now, if it's a changeover for the better, if, for instance, the sun was in Pisces, and now it won't be, but okay, let's use the actual example that's going to happen. We're going to have that new moon happen in Cancer season, and then it's going to transition into Leo, right? During that cycle, as the sun transitions from being in Cancer into Leo, that's a dignity change that is more positive. So that's like you begin doing something, and as you're trying to develop that, it speaks to something becoming much better as you try. Now, it's still a change. It's still like you have to alter what it is that you started out doing, but you alter it, and then something even better or easier or something fortunate is coming in. So you got to play with it depending on the change in dignity. That's the first thing. The other thing is where specifically does the changeover of spirit happen? Does it happen when the sun and the moon are in good aspect, when they're in sextile or trine, or does it happen when they're in that square aspect, which is going to indicate that you have to relocate something, you have to transplant your idea, and there's definitely a misfortune or an obstacle that you're potentially having to confront. That's quite difficult and hard, and it portends that potentially that entire cycle will just kind of maybe be, you know, stunted, and you can't recover it. So you just have to do what you can and muddle through until the next cycle begins. So those are some of the descriptions of how this kind of plays out over the next year in 2023 in terms of having this alternation between this regular sequence and a almost like it's almost like a retrograde sequence. You know, the sun and the moon don't go retrograde. This is almost like for me, this is almost like the closest version of that, where uh, there's a little bit of a putting the cart before the horse type of thing, or having a little bit of an odd timing situation that sort of interrupts the natural flow of things, or, you know, causes it to be potentially just chaotic in some way, because it's like you're beginning something and then it's like, oh, you have to pivot and turn and make it about something else. And depending on how things are looking in the chart at that time and dignity and all that, it could either go well, or it could either be, you know, a catastrophe, maybe potentially sometimes. So that is my take on this second significant thing that is happening astrologically in the year 2023. Tomorrow, we are going to get into the third of the 5 biggest astrology transits for 2023. This one's going to be a lot less heady and technical. This is going to be talking about the entrance of Pluto into the sign of Aquarius. That I'm really looking forward to, because that is major. That is a major, major, major transit that is huge. Everybody has their hot take on it, and I'm ready to throw my hat in the ring with that one, and let you guys know what I think of that transit, that it's going to be with us for a very long time and really tones 2023 as a whole, obviously, but over the next couple of decades as well. So thanks everybody so much for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions. Please drop a comment or two in the comment. Thank you to everybody that's a new subscriber. I really appreciate that. I'm trying to grow the channel. That's my goal in the next year to come. So please like, share, and subscribe, all that stuff. And I'll be back real soon with another astrology video tomorrow. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.